Hello everybody, good evening. It is very nice to see everybody here, and I know there are a number of people online as well, and you may choose to watch this on catch up. So my name is Jenny Hyam and I'm the Vice Chancellor here at St George's, and one of the many privileges of the position is the fact that you get to hear and introduce our wonderful inaugural events. I love an inaugural lecture because I think often the content says a lot about the person, and as opposed to this is going to be about statistics and numbers, I'm sure, in part, but it also tells a personal journey and also what interests that individual. So I have known you since I came here. I remember meeting you very early on, and what is interesting and lovely to see is how many people who have worked with you in the past have also come back this evening. So thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Peacock. I believe you're going to be giving the vote of thanks in due course, and you are somebody who did your PhD here. So that's very kind of you, and we look forward to hearing from you later. So, as we would expect, somebody such as Philip, who's given so much to the university, both in terms of his academic activity, but also as a great teacher. And one of the things that I have had an increasing respect, I always knew about statistics, everybody knows the word statistics. And then when you become into the section recruitment in universities, and I came from Imperial College, statisticians were like gold dust. If you get a good statistician, hold on to them. They are so vital for so many things related to research and education. And frankly, I never felt as though we had enough. And so we're extremely grateful for the fact that you have pursued your area, but also I know passed on so much of your knowledge. So thank you very much. As is traditional with inaugurals, we let Philip do the entire talking until you stand up and give the vote of thanks, and we don't permit you the opportunity to ask any questions, but there is a drinks reception just adjacent to this lecture theatre, and I hope all of you will join us at least for a short time, mingle, and obviously if you do have any follow-ups, that's the time to bring them up. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Jenny. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, and thank you for everyone coming tonight. It really is a great pleasure to see everyone here tonight. And some of you have come from sort of quite near, some of you have come from quite far, and I think the furthest person anyone's travelled today is from Aberdeen. That's my friend Graham from school. I've known him for an awful long time. And it always feels like a bit of a competition. Who's got the person that's travelled the furthest at an inaugural? And I think I definitely beat you, Jonathan, because I think yours was Wales or Liverpool, was that? Yeah, so I think I might be in the running for the for winning this. And also thank you everyone online across the country, and in particular my sister and her family, who are my sister Janet, Kevin and Calvin and Brendan, and hopefully my brother Stephen as well, are watching in Devon. And I think I might have some people overseas, international as well. I think I might have a couple of people in Australia, but you must remember it's the middle of the night there for them, so they're probably fast asleep. And I think they're probably also, knowing both of them, they watch Eurovision relentlessly every year, so they've been up all weekend for that as well. Hopefully some colleagues in Athens, and hopefully a colleague in Florida, and some hopefully a couple of well, some family and also some colleagues watching in France as well. So I'm really feel very honoured with this. And I also want to give a great thanks to June Phillips and the communication and the marketing team, because they do such a wonderful job in pulling everything together. And you know, without them, none of this would take place. And I must admit, when I first sort of came in to George's in the morning and I saw my picture on the posters and the electric sort of you know, the electric screens that are outside, it was quite difficult to accept that was me and that this was really happening. But I must admit, I've been grown to sort of become used to being sort of, as Jack, one of my personal tutors, said, George's poster boy. And tomorrow I'm going to get pulled down with a big bump, really, because it's not going to exist anymore. And I must thank George's, because George's has been really great, allows you to sort of develop and grow. And without them, I wouldn't be here tonight. And it's a great honour to be here. I feel very privileged. And I must admit, I never imagined I would be here. It still feels like a dream in a way. I'm just going to wake up. It's a bit surreal. And I'm going to wake up tomorrow and it's not true. And I also feel a little bit of anxiety because I've never presented anything to most people in this room. Okay, so you're going to be sort of seeing me for the first time presenting. It's like me in my natural habitat, the lecture theatre. And probably for many of you, the first time in a suit and tie, I would imagine as well. Okay, so that's really a bit sort of unusual in that respect. But I just really want to sort of thank everyone for being here and everyone online. Now, two people who can't be here tonight are my parents, and Harry and Joan. This is a picture of them on their wedding day over 70 years ago. Now, my father had a whole host of jobs. He used to drive London buses, and when we lived in Reading, he worked for the post office. My mother was a traditional housewife. I mean, I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but before she got married, and this is a word that I really have a difficulty in saying, and it's comptometer operator. And if anyone doesn't know what a comptometer is, that's what it looks like. It used to be like, it's basically a key-driven sort of mechanical calculator, and it takes a lot of training to be able to operate something like this. I think it was about 6 months training. And I know that also, as far as I remember, Heather, I was really pleased that she could be here tonight. Her mother did it as well. Her mother was it's a word it doesn't roll off the tongue. But anyway, obviously without them, I wouldn't be here tonight. But paradoxically, if they had their way, I would not be here tonight. Because when I was growing up, less than 5% of my generation went to university, and things were financially tight. And I remember being in my first year of A-levels, I think it was, and my mother said to me, you know, there's no way you're going to university, we just cannot afford it. So you can get that out of your head, just pack up that idea. But somehow, obviously, as sort of 17 and 18-year-olds do, they never listen to their parents, and they just do exactly what they want. And somehow I got to university. And okay, before I carry on with my journey and with what I want to present tonight, this might sound bizarre, but who am I? Okay, because I just wonder if you do know who I am. Hopefully you know who I am, Philip Sedgwick. I'm assuming not just random strangers have just walked off the street of Tooting. But what does a professor of medical statistics and medical education actually do? And that's a question I've been asking myself a lot recently, because really I don't know at times, you know, what I'm meant to do. I do know that some people would say that my career has been built on chance, and it probably has. But I do a lot of teaching at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, medical students, and also biomedical science students, and healthcare science students as well. And my passion, I've just realised I was told to stand still, and I keep moving. So the only way you can stop me from moving is to nail my feet to the floor. If I do walk out of here, you must tell me to get back in place. My passion is teaching, I suppose, statistical thinking. I don't actually like to call it statistics anymore, but statistical thinking, because I think we've moved with the times a little bit. Now, statistical thinking is very much about thinking about getting students to appreciate the study design so that we can collect meaningful data. Basically be able to answer a focused research question and make suitable inferences from that. So that's basically what I do, a lot of teaching. I'm also getting more interested in the ethics of statistical thinking, because there's a lot of ethics that come about in terms of, you know, study designs and the statistical analytical techniques that I use. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I also have done a lot of research whilst I've been at George's. You know, over how many years I've been here? I think it's probably too many to I care to recall. But I get involved in a lot of research, and more recently I've become interested in early phase clinical trials, because they're the things that sort of give me the buzz. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into talk about a lot of formulae and sort of methods and everything else to do with statistics. I mean, because I know that would just send many people just rushing out of the room. So I'm just trying to focus on something else tonight, tell you my journey. Now, okay, where did my journey start? I suppose I'm going to take it from university days. And I don't really want to focus so much on the A-level days, although they were great times. I had great times spent with Graham in biology and chemistry. It really was a sort of times of enlightenment. But I really think my academic journey started at university. So why Aberystwyth and why did I study statistics? To be honest, I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea why I chose them. It just seemed like a really good idea at the time. Aberystwyth as a town is quite small. There's only about 20,000 people there, and has about 8,000 students. So you can appreciate how much the university dominates everything that goes on there. And in particular, it's isolated. If you want a quiet life, just go to Aberystwyth. There's absolutely no shopping malls. There's no multiplex cinemas or anything like that. It's really a quiet life. And I really love studying there. You've got on the seafront, you've got at one end, the north end, you've got what's called Constitution Hill, affectionately known as Consti, and like this cliff railway which scales the side, and at the top you've got a camera obscura. And a few years ago when I went back to Aberystwyth, I was totally amazed that they built a bowling alley on the top. And I thought to myself, why? You're not going to get students scaling Consti on a Friday evening to go and play a game of bowling. They're not going to be capable of that, most of them. Okay. And at the southern and the south end of the promenade, you've got the old college, which I think dominates the whole seafront, basically. And I love that place. And it was originally meant to be a hotel, but those plans fell through, as they do. In 1872, it opened up as a university. It was the first university in Wales. And it's recently had its 150th anniversary last year. And that was some momentous occasion for them. It basically opened up, as far as I know, on the donations of about 70,000 people across Wales. And that I thought was quite remarkable, because I don't think you would get the public donating so much money nowadays. And it was money from the rich and the poor, and they referred to that as the pennies of the people. And this is now, people also referred to this as the People's University. The Welsh take so much pride in their education. It is unbelievable. It was one of the first universities in the UK to accept women. So it really was quite progressive. And nowadays, it is progressing very quickly. I was surprised when I went back a few years ago to see that they now have a school of nursing. There's no reason why they shouldn't. And they also have a veterinary school as well. So they're expanding all the time. You wouldn't really think of that as, a university which is so remote, that it's expanding so much. It's probably not the best university in the world, and I'll say that. But then how do you define best university? This university consistently ranks among the top universities for student satisfaction and teaching. So it must be good in some respects. And I just sort of take that buzz. I think it's because it's a really nice community. Everyone tends to know each other. It's a great place to study, and I'd highly recommend it. Now, I appreciate this photo is taken by a drone, but it gives a really good sort of overall sort of impression of the current university. But as it moved out, you can actually sort of see somewhere up around there. It's a bit of this. It's not working very well. Around about there, that's the old college. It moved up the hill, Penglice Hill, and rapidly expanding. And this was the type of view that I woke up to every morning in my second year, student halls of residence. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I look back upon those days with great affection. Now, looking west over Ceredigion Bay, very little pollution. You used to get fantastic sunsets. I found it very difficult to pick my favourite out of my total collection of 66,651 photoshots. It's that type of place you just constantly just want to take, the best photo you can of the sunset. Coming back up onto Penglice, I did a lot of my had quite a few lectures in what's called the Physical Science Building, and this building was, I think it was built in 1962, and it was quite a modern piece of architecture, and it was immortalised in these set of stamps, which were, they came out in September 1971. And I remember when I was growing up seeing these stamps on the letters that came in the post and thinking how ugly that building is. It's just, why do we still want to celebrate modern architecture? Because it is just so ugly. And when I got to Aberystwyth University and I realised that the building I was going to have lectures on was in these stamps, I began to grow to love it. I really thought it was a really nice building. I know it looks a bit ugly, but I like it. Anyway, moving on. Probably the most famous alumni has to be then Prince Charles. now King Charles III. It was rumoured that his mother thought it might be a good idea if he went and learned some Welsh and some Welsh history prior to his investiture as the Prince of Wales. But apparently he wasn't very good at Welsh, and he was a gross disappointment to his Welsh tutor. But anyway, never mind, I can sympathise with him because Welsh is really quite hard. At the end of my degree there, I mean, I had to leave. I didn't really want to go. I honestly felt when I got awarded that certificate, great disappointment, because it's in black and white. It's all no colour. It's just in black and white. It's all in Latin. I couldn't understand a word that it said. I still to this day do not know what it really says. I just assume. I don't think it actually says what my degree was in and what grade classification I got. But nonetheless, you know, it is what it is. I did acquire a few Welsh phrases, and you know, I did learn dim parcio and dim usigi. Now, if Carwyn was here, okay, our Welsh resident speaker, he probably has to give me 10 out of 10 for effort, probably about 0 out of 10 for pronunciation. And then I developed quite good skills at Pac-Man, and I don't know how many of you actually remember that. And I thought, well, you know, armed with these, I must be in a very good position to conquer the world, as any graduate does. But I didn't actually get very far, because I ended up, I say I didn't get very far, I mean, some people might like this, but I ended up at the Welsh office in Cardiff, civil service. And I think the careers officer at university thought that that would be a good position for me, good career trajectory, good pension. But when I got there, it bored me to tears, because all we were doing was compiling tables of figures like housing, or you know, number of road traffic accidents, etc., and so on. Bored me to tears. About after 8 months, I left there and came to George's. And my first role at George's, well, I've stayed here ever since. So if you look at the dates on some of those papers, you'll be able to work out how long I've been here. I really enjoyed this. It was a bit of a baptism of fire. I learned so much, and it was. I was a statistician involved in a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of amitriptyline for the treatment of depression in general practice, minor depression, and it was led by Paul Freeling. And as far as I'm aware, Paul Freeling was one of the most influential GPs of the modern era. He was a really clever guy, very interesting. We had Jean Paykel, psychiatrist. He left George's just before I arrived, and he went to Cambridge. And lead statistician Ashok, and I'm really pleased that Ashok can be here today. I learned so much from you, Ashok, in those early days, and I'm really very, very grateful. When I put this slide together, several things struck me, and I hadn't appreciated this since when we published these two papers, which was some time ago. How things have changed. Look at the order of the authors. Okay, I'm last. I just assumed at the time when I was a statistician, just joined this institution, statisticians, least important person gets put at the end, right? And everyone else gets put in order of importance, all right? So obviously the person who writes the paper comes first, and everyone else just gets put in some order according to what they choose. But how times have changed now, because obviously besides the person who writes the paper, they come first. The most senior people will fight to come last. And I've seen people arguing this and have much sort of discussion as to who should be last. I don't understand. I don't understand what the thrill is of coming last as an author in a list like this, but how times have changed. And the other thing is that I noticed when I looked at the statistical techniques, and Ashok, this is no reflection upon you as well at all. This is just a reflection of how times have changed. Statistical and analytical techniques have developed. We didn't have any sample size calculations in here. We use subgroup analyses. We didn't adjust for multiple hypothesis testing. And the way we dealt with missing observations would be totally frowned upon. Last observation carried forward. I suspect if you tried to submit those today, they would get rejected. Now that raises, for me, many sort of ethical considerations, because this has contributed to the body of knowledge and how depression is dealt with in general practice. It takes about 15 years, apparently, to get from the publication stage to practice, I've been told. But if I'm looking back upon this sort of type of research, and we're now sort of saying, it doesn't pass muster, doesn't that throw up an ethical dilemma in terms of how we use it and treat and we use it in healthcare and we treat patients? It throws up some questions, I think, about should we be putting so much sort of emphasis on it? because it doesn't really pass muster. But anyway, that's probably another debate. This post only lasted 8 months. You know, there's limited funding, as there always is in academia. You don't sort of stay in post for very long. You have to sort of move. I remember then getting a position in, I think it was called the Department of Community Health and General Practice. Janet might want to correct me on that. And this was under the, my line manager was Martin Bland. And, you know, very clever guy. And I learned so much from him in the couple of years that I was in that position. And it was in this position that Janet was the first person I shared an office with at St. George's. So that was, I say, an interesting experience. It was a good experience, Janet, wasn't it? But a few years ago now. And I'm really grateful that Janet has agreed to give the vote of thanks this evening. Thank you. Now, after that, after those 2 years in that role, I moved to the sleep lab. Okay, now, who wouldn't want to go and work in the sleep lab? It sounds really interesting. At the time when I sort of went to the sleep lab, which was then based up on Cops Hill, Atkinson Morley's Hospital at Cops Hill, which has now been closed down, turned into luxury flats. It's absolutely amazing if you get an opportunity to look inside. Been relocated, obviously AMH is now relocated down to George's, this site. Sleep lab was headed by Professor Arthur Crisp, and I got to work then quite closely with my colleagues Marion Crutchfield, Margaret Mycura. I wasn't going to use your name before you got married, and also Sharon Burrow, and that was a really great experience. Who wouldn't want to work in a sleep lab? This was a specialty that was quite young. Okay, it was only about 50 years old. Things were being found out about sleep all the time. Okay, and it was really interesting. I thought it was a really exciting opportunity. I still was a statistician, but the unique advantage of, I think, of working in a place where you actually physically collect that data as a statistician is you begin to appreciate the nuances of the data that you're collecting. And that's always an advantage. I was, as I said, I was involved in collecting the data, so I would wire up the patients, okay, and put them to bed. And in terms of recording sleep, we would be interested in 3 systems. In particular, we've got the EOG, the electrooculagram, which measures the activity around the eyes. The EEG, the electroencephalogram, which measures general activity across the top part of the brain, the encephalus. It's very general activity. And then we also measure the EMG, which is electromyogram. And in particular, we would measure the activity of the muscles under the chin, mentalis, submentalis muscles. And then that would give us these electrical, physiological sort of recordings. Now, we would be interested in 2 broad areas of sleep, non-REM and REM sleep. REM sleep is typically what people would think of, you know, when your dreaming occurs. And non-REM is further subdivided into 4 stages. You've got stages 1 and 2, which is light sleep, and stages 3 and 4, which are collectively known as slow wave sleep or deep sleep, the deep restorative sleep. And these are the sort of electrophysiological sort of trace signals that you would see. The top one, stage 4, which we just generally call slow wave sleep now, you can see that you've got these very large, sort of very slow waves of electrical activity coming across the EOG and the EEG, okay? And then stage REM, very nondescript activity. But what characterizes REM are these rapid eye movements. Your eyes are moving very fast from side to side. And some of you, if any of you've got, for example, I think you'd see this if you have a dog. Sometimes when your dog is fast asleep, you can see its eyes moving under its eyelids very quickly. And these eyes are just moving very quickly from side to side, hence the name rapid eye movement. There's a picture of me modeling the electrode placement points when I had a lot more hair, but it seems like a long time ago. But it was great times. I enjoyed working in the sleep lab. Now, these are what we call hypnographs, and they display the progression of sleep across the night. You've got local time across the bottom, sleep stage down the side, and MT and MA. MT is movement time, so it's when, you know, gross readjustment in bed, or minor arousal. MA is a minor arousal, maybe a small muscular twitch. And typically, what we would expect in a healthy 20-year-old female is this type of progression of sleep stages across the night. So after taking a short while to fall asleep, maybe go into stages 1 or 2 and then drop off into slow wave sleep. And they might stay there for about 30 to 40 minutes. Then they come into REM sleep. REM sleep is represented by these yellow boxes. And they do this type of cycling through the night, non-REM followed by REM, non-REM followed by REM. And you have probably between 4 to 6 non-REM to REM cycles in a night, averaging about 90 minutes each. And that's what you would, we would expect in a healthy 20-year-old. Okay, this was one of the sleep disorders that I always thought was one of the most dramatic. And, you know, we saw quite a few different sleep disorders, but obstructive sleep apnea, this is a 45-year-old man. Now, I don't know how much you know about sleep apnea. I'm no expert, but what would happen during the night, our neck muscles will tend to relax. And that has a tendency to begin to collapse. Well, I say collapse, our neck muscles will relax in the night. Excuse me, and I'm trying to be politically correct here, but anyone with too much fat around their neck, that fat will begin to collapse the airway. And you can imagine that could be really quite drastic. And so there's a natural sort of survival instinct is for that person to wake up and start breathing again. And you can see here in this sleep hypnogram here, that this individual cannot get into slow wave sleep because every time they try to, the airways collapse, they wake up, and their slow wave sleep is they hardly get any, the REM sleep is interrupted as well. So at the end of the night, they're going to feel completely unrefreshed. And you can imagine that's really not very nice position to be in. The treatment for that is CPAP, apparently continuous positive airway pressure, where you blow sort of a low sort of amount of air down through the airways to keep it awake, and it's quite effective. But when I arrived at the sleep lab, I remember Marion Crutchfield having to draw these by hand, and it used to take her about 2 to 3 hours. And they thought I was wonderful because I managed to get these done by computer program in like 1 or 2 minutes, and in colour as well. And so I was already on a good footing there. You know, it was excellent. I really enjoyed my time in the sleep lab. I learned so much. Now, I was really lucky to be given access to a database called the 30-Day Study. And I can see Margaret smirking a lot because Margaret spent so much time collecting this data. I didn't collect any of it. It was just simply for me secondary data analysis. And it was a really interesting study. There were 6 young females. I was going to say who volunteered. I don't know if they actually did volunteer or slightly press ganged into this because they were placement students from Surrey University. And they had their sleep amongst a whole load of other variables, recorded for 30 consecutive days and nights. And that was a massive undertaking. There were 6 females. Now, this is showing the time in and out of bed for just one of those participants. Now, I appreciate if you look at that for too long, it fries your brain. So you might want to close your eyes. But obviously, the dark areas are when this participant was in bed. The orange is when she was out of bed. Not necessarily, I say when she was in bed, not necessarily asleep. Obviously, there might be a bit of time getting to sleep, a bit of sleep latency, may even got out of bed for a short while. But typically, I suppose, that is the time they were in bed. Now, what you have to sort of notice from this, I suppose, is just, well, I need to remind you, this is what we call a naturalistic study. So the participants chose when they went to bed and got out of bed. They just chose that completely themselves. And obviously, as you would expect in sort of young adults, you know, particularly on a Friday and Saturday night, they delay their sleep phase by quite a bit. And you can see so this participant was going to bed at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And then on a Sunday night, they bring it forward. They phase advance their sleep period to get ready for the week. And at the weekend, they phase delay it. Now, the aim of my PhD was to try and establish the effects of the social cues in the calendar week, you know, like going to work or going to parties or whatever that these participants are going to be doing. And that was a really interesting sort of exercise. I did my PhD part-time. I did it over 10 years. I did it in the evenings, at weekends, and during my vacations. It took a lot of commitment, but I'm glad I got there. Now, what we found in this, I thought was really quite remarkable, because those phase delays in the time in which people were going to bed are quite similar to what you would experience with international time travel. That was quite a shift. But what we found, well, I found, I should say, is that these social cues and the delays in the timing and the advancements had very little impact on what we call sleep structure, i.e. the timing of the sleep stages, when they occur and then when they occur during the sleep period, and also the amount of time that people spent in each of those stages. I found that quite remarkable. Now, that might be sort of because I suppose that they were young adults and they could easily adapt to these changes in the timing of their sleep. But I suppose it just shows the resilience and the flexibility of what we call the body clock. And it's the body clock that controls sleep, and it controls the timing of the sleep stages. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. That's what I observed. I have to thank Martin Bland, okay, a really clever guy, in helping me get my PhD. If it wasn't for him, I would not have got my PhD. I did not know how to analyze that data set when I got here. Had not got a clue. He didn't get taught that at university. And he basically brought so much clarity to it, and I'm really very grateful because, you know, without him, I doubt if I would be here. Right. Now, what I'm meant to say, I don't know if any of you are aware about the body clock, but the body clock not only controls the sleep-wake cycle, but it also controls a whole host of other body rhythms, like body temperature, rhythms in endocrine rhythms, and also cardiovascular system as well. So it's not just controlling the sleep-wake cycle, it's actually a very sort of, I suppose, I was hard to say very useful, but obviously it's a very sort of intricate part of our body that controls so much of what we do. Now, okay, when I came to George's, you were almost thrown in at the deep end when it came to teaching. It was almost like you expected. There was no option. Everyone had to do it. And it was really strange for me because I went from this position of being a student and almost overnight you had to go and teach. And you think, there's no training in teaching. How am I meant to do this? I did think, quite possibly naively, that medical students, because this was the first sort of, I suppose, introduction to teaching, that medical students would, without doubt, want to know how do we improve the effectiveness of drugs and treatments through clinical trials. They'd want to know sort of how those type of studies work, or they'd want to know how we establish if, say, a personal risk behaviour like eating bacon, a personal behaviour, some personal behaviour like eating bacon is a risk factor for a disease like colon cancer. Surely they'd want to know that. But with the exception of a few students, most students I found were pretty bored, they had no interest, and they couldn't see the relevance of their learning to their future practice. And it really was, I found, quite demoralising teaching. And I just thought, I mean, you're wondering why I've got a dustbin here. Okay. But I honestly felt that these students were just shoving facts into a dustbin the night before an exam, and then you know, distilling them out in the exam the next day without really understanding anything, and then basically forgetting about everything, full stop. And I found that quite demoralising. I thought, what's the point of education if that's how it works? And then I sort of cottoned on. That's what happened to me at university as well. You know, we just had to remember facts, cram for the exam, and just get through it and just hope we pass. And it really was, I found a pointless exercise. And that's just my reflection upon it now. Now, I do remember that at this stage, Martin Bland introduced, he was obviously overseeing all the teaching of statistics to medical students. And he did something which was quite revolutionary in trying to overcome this dustbin effect. He was criticised a lot for it. He went for small groups. So out of the large lecture into small groups. And a lot of people said that's not cost efficient. You should take everyone back into the lecture theatre, but he stuck with it. And it was one of the sort of steps, I think, in order to sort of moving forward in education. Now, what's actually quite interesting is those ideas were very much what the GMC wanted anyway. Now, the GMC were, I think, very much aware of this dustbin effect in students and what was happening there, and they wanted to change that. They wanted to sort of set standards for teaching, learning, and assessments, and they had three, I suppose, sort of how they set it out in Tomorrow's Doctors, three versions of that. And really, this was very much around trying to get away from the dustbin effect and actually getting students, I suppose, to be more responsible for their learning and makes learning student-centric. So that was the introduction, very much around the introduction of small groups and getting them to take responsibility for their learning. And I think the GMC's Tomorrow's Doctors has really sort of changed how I think about learning and teaching. And assessment as well. And I think that was facilitated as well by the introduction of the graduate entry program at George's, where we had an MBBS degree where we only accepted graduates. So it's very similar to the American system, and it's what we call an accelerated program over 4 years. And so I think this basically allowed everyone to get rid of the shackles of the shackles of traditional teaching, which I think basically we were all tied to somehow. And we're also teaching, what we were interested in, with really no idea what was going on elsewhere in the curriculum. And I found that really sort of made me think about my teaching. Now, probability, okay, that basically dictates everything I do. As I said at the beginning, I'm very much passionate about teaching statistical thinking, right? Getting students to think about sensible study designs, how we collect meaningful data and then answer focused questions in order to make sensible inferences. And obviously that's really important in healthcare. Now, everything I do is underpinned by probability, and I'm beholden to this in a way. Now, probability as a concept is relatively straightforward. It's just really the proportion of times that an event occurs, and there's nothing really sort of challenging about that, I should say. But what is interesting, I think, is how we use it in healthcare. It's not intuitive, and it throws. I don't think many people. I know that a lot of doctors and a lot of patients don't find probability intuitive, and it's very difficult to get to grips with. Although it's a very simple, I think it's a very simple concept. For example, the proportion of probability, I suppose, of being a woman in the room tonight is approximately about half, or maybe a bit less than half. It's just a number of women, it's a proportion of the number of women in the room. That's a straightforward concept. But how we use it is not. And I want to just have a little exercise. This is an exercise I use with students. Okay, I want to do something different in this inaugural. Now, you probably have seen this type of statement on patient information sheets. You get some drug and it will tell you the side effects are X, Y, Z. And in this case, amoxicillin, which is an antibiotic that treats infections of the chest and dental infections as well, apparently has what's called a common side effect. 10% chance of risk, or 10% risk, has a risk of 10% of a skin rash. Now, what makes it a little bit more interesting here is that statisticians interchange risk and probability. So I don't think that always helps in my teaching. But if I said to you, okay, a drug has a risk of 10% of a skin rash as a side effect, what of these following options would it mean to you? A, using amoxicillin will result in a rash in 10% of the total area of your skin. 10% of the people using amoxicillin will develop a rash. Or C, do you think you'll develop a skin rash 10% of the time when using the drug, or the risk of a skin rash is minimal compared to the benefits of amoxicillin, or none of the options A to D? Now, I'm going to just do the old-fashioned hand raising hands. Who thinks it's option A, 10% of your skin? That's one. So we've got one person. Okay, excellent. I always find it interesting when you do this with students because they always look around to see who else is going to put their hands up, and then when they don't, they take their hands down. Who thinks it's B, 10% of the people? So that's a fair proportion of you. Okay. Who thinks it's C, you'll develop a skin rash 10% of the time when using amoxicillin? A couple of you. Maybe Matt's not really too sure. I'm not too sure what option Matt's going for. But the risk of a skin rash is minimal compared to the benefits of amoxicillin. That's interesting, that. None of the options A to D? None of them. That's really, really interesting because when I did this with first-year medical students at the beginning of this year, these are the results I got. Most of the students went for B, which I suppose is the traditional understanding of probability. Quite a few people went for E. So B was, 10% of people using amoxicillin would develop a rash. And E, they said none of the above options. I didn't really, unfortunately, I didn't explore what that meant to them. But what you will always get with students, they'll say, get someone who votes for B, and they'll say, how can anyone, who in the right mind would think C, or who in the right mind would think A? And it's this sort of interesting eye-opener for students, particularly at the beginning of their course, that not everyone thinks like you. And I think that's really important to make them aware. But there's something more about probability that I'll come on to in the next slide. But at the same time, whilst everyone thinks like you, your patient is not going to think like you as well. So you've got to start thinking what I call outside the box, because what may appear to be quite rational to you is not going to appear rational to someone else. And so that's why you need to really think about, in this statistical thinking, how you're communicating the results, because probability underpins everything I do. Now, the second example I want to focus on, it really does touch on communication, this. Now, it's estimated that approximately 1 in 8 men will develop prostate cancer at some point in their lifetime. That's about 13%. Now, when you're giving this information to someone, I have no idea how a man is going to process that. Because I've known men who say, look, I already know 4 or 5 men who've got prostate cancer. So does that mean that my risk is like 1 in 80, much lower? Because I already I know someone, okay? And then I know some men who say, I don't know anyone with prostate cancer. Does that mean to say my risk is a lot higher? And this may sound a bit weird to us, but I think at the end of the day, how people process risk to them is very personal. People underestimate it or overestimate it. And obviously, with risk, risk is based on this idea that you look at a whole population of people, and then you find out how, in this case, the whole population, say the UK, and how many men develop prostate cancer. And that's how we just get this risk. But to a man, that's meaningless, because the risk that a man will get prostate cancer is basically 0, 1. You'll either get it or you won't. So I have absolutely no idea how a man processes that information. So what you've got to begin to appreciate, okay, that as a statistician, much of the work that I do is underpinned by probability. I can't give you exact answers as to whether a disease is going to develop or not. All I can say is the likelihood of it appearing, it may or it may not develop. And I suppose that's why people find statisticians quite annoying, because they sit on the fence. They never give an exact answer. Someone said, the art of statistics is never having to say you're certain. You can just say you're based on probability all the time. So I don't know how we begin to introduce that into our teaching. Well, I do know how. It's very challenging, sort of how we begin to introduce that into our teaching, and then help the future students of future doctors communicate that with their patients. Now, okay, risk communication. This radically changed my thinking about my subject, how I teach, everything I do from now on. And risk communication is, in a nutshell, it's very much around sort of helping students as future doctors talk to their patients about the risks and benefits of a particular treatment. It could also be about, sort of, I suppose, the risk of having a particular disease. Now, this introduced into my teaching, originally with Angela Hall back about 20 years ago, and then subsequently Catherine Eucas and Angela Backin. I'm really pleased that Catherine and Angela are here tonight, because you do not know how much this changed the approach to my teaching. It was really brilliant that we could introduce this into our teaching and actually help students start to think about the relevance of their learning to future practice. But also at the same time, you taught me a lot about communication, general communication, okay, particularly when you're teaching students. And I'm going to come and sort of refer to that in a little time. And I think sort of it's a real challenge, because what I see as really problematic, public health people work on populations, but as a statistician, I don't think I always do. Obviously, I use the population in order to do research on, but at the end of the day, we've got to apply that research to a single patient, and how do you do it? And I think it's really challenging. Now, okay, moving this idea a little bit further, I was very influenced by Richard Feynman. I read a book of his in my 20s. I don't know if anyone who knows who Richard Feynman is, but apparently he's meant to be one of the greatest, astrophysicists of our time. I know absolutely nothing about astrophysics, but his book I read had very little to do with astrophysics. It was all about teaching and learning. He has an awful lot to say about this. And these 2 quotes, he has many quotes attributed to him, but I think these 2 basically everything that I stand for in my teaching. This is what I believe in. First of all, if you can't explain something to a first-year student, then you haven't really understood it. And I'm a great passionate believer about that. And this here, understand, don't memorize, learn principles, not formulas. I think that basically sort of epitomizes everything that the GMC wanted us to do in terms of the development of our teaching. But as I say, this really is what I stand for. And I suppose everything that I look, sort of picking up this sort of the ideas of Richard Feynman, and also the ideas of tomorrow's doctors, and everything I learned through the communication skills, have probably molded me into who I am today and how my approach to teaching. Now, I took those skills forward and I got commissioned, so that was brilliant because I got paid for it. Okay, so that meant extra money. You can't suck off at extra money to write for the BMJ, and I did that weekly between 2009 and 2015. a series of what's called the BMJ endgames. I have no idea why they're called the endgames. As Daniel will tell us, as a great chess player, endgame is that name you give to that really tactical move to actually do a checkmate. And I have no idea why they called them the endgames, but it's sort of stuck. What I did here in these articles was I picked something from the literature, a research article, and I would then I'd ask for a series of questions about some study design or some sort of types of statistical analyses, and then I'd give the answers with short explanations. And it probably, no more than 1,000 words, no more than perhaps 1,200 words, relatively short. But a massive success. It's made me, I mean, sometimes I don't like to sort of blow my own trumpet, but I think it's made me a household name internationally. The number of emails I've got from people across the world saying, thank you for doing this. It's used, junior doctors and students to use them for their professional development. They even get used at universities now. They're put into sort of essential reading and so on. And to me, I suppose this is what really made me. Another sort of example, the work I did with Catherine and Angela in terms of risk communication is really what the GMC was piping up in terms of integrated learning, okay, and bringing people together from different disciplines into the classroom. And we do teach side by side 2 different disciplines in risk communication. I think that's really quite unique. And what is, I think, also interesting about this is it gave me a great opportunity to work with colleagues. I wrote some articles with colleagues from MLE, Medical Law and Ethics. I wrote some with Daniel and Carwyn. I also wrote some with Catherine in research in risk communication. Also did one with Nan Greenwood, and I'm really pleased that you're here, a psychologist. And also I did quite a few of these articles with Louise Marston, the colleague who worked at George's, is now at UCL. And it just really sort of broadened my understanding of my subject. And it really gave me a lot of interest in what I do. Now, this one here, I say they're very successful. This one here is probably better called as, probably historical cohort study. That might be a better name, but incredibly successful. But how do you measure success? That one on the left has over 500,000 online hits. And I think that's phenomenal for a short article, which really, just didn't really have a lot of promotion in the BMJ. This one here, Understanding the Hawthorne Effect, which I wrote with Nan. Now, if anyone of you don't know what the Hawthorne Effect is, I need to focus on it. Basically, it was observed at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Chicago. And there's a study that was underdone in the 20s and 30s, if I remember rightly, but the coin wasn't phrased until about the 50s or 60s. And basically what they were doing, they were studying productivity under different types of light, low light, bright light, etc., and so on. And what they found is, as soon as you actually start studying someone, well, in this case, the worker's productivity went up. As soon as you stop studying them, productivity went back down to normal. So the essence there is, as soon as you start basically observing someone, they change their behavior. And then once you stop studying them, they go back to normal. Now, this article here, I take a lot of pride in. It gets cited once or twice a week. I think that's quite phenomenal for what it actually is. And it's interesting as well because the Hawthorne Effect generates a lot of interest. And I get a lot of, I don't want to say vitriolic email, but I get lots of emails from people who say, it doesn't exist, don't be stupid. And I'm not going to pigeonhole people whether it, but sometimes surgeons, I've worked with surgeons who will say that cannot exist. How can the Hawthorne Effect actually exist? They're not interested in it at all. But for some reason, it was often I used to get these emails from Australians, and I have no idea why it was Australians who actually took exception to this. But I really take a lot of pride in this. This is what defined me, and I brought into these my skills that I developed through communication, basically knowing who your audience is, making sure that you know who they are, and basically give them what they want so they can take something away in a bite-sized fashion. Now, moving on, obviously as an academic, one of the perks is that you get to travel the world, or at least you did. until the pandemic struck. And then you get to attend these boring conferences in the comfort of your own home. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper, but not as exciting. Now, one of them that I've been to so many conferences, but the ones that have really influenced me are what we call JSM, Joint Statistical Meetings. Now, that's the annual meeting of the American Statistical Association. Now, I always remember sort of seeing it come up every year and thinking, well, there can't be much there for me as a teacher. Can't be a lot there for me. It's all going to be theoretical stuff. That's not really me, because I'm really now being pushed into sort of teaching. And then I got this email from a colleague, Penny Reynolds, and said, will you come and just present something in Miami? And she is in Florida. That's where she now lives in Florida. So I thought, yeah, I'll go along, a trip, especially if the department's going to pay for it. And why not? And I was absolutely blown away how much emphasis they put on teaching. They have a really big, active sort of section for teaching of statistics in the health sciences. And what I found was really interesting was the chasm between how we teach statistics in the UK, Europe, and in North America. And it was, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to sort of offend anyone, but I honestly felt that they were something like 30 years behind us somehow. And that's just how I felt. And so they had this crazy Englishman coming along presenting these new sort of novel techniques as to how he's teaching statistics. I don't know how it went down, but it couldn't have been that bad. I got invited to go back. I got invited to go to Montreal, and I think I also got invited to Chicago, and then I went to Vancouver, and obviously I went to a conference in my own home. But what was really, for me, actually sort of a real great honor, I got in 2018 from Vancouver, I got the Best Contributed Presentation Award for my innovative approaches to teaching. So the Americans obviously liked me to some extent. But then I go again in 2021. And so not only was I the first European to get it, I was the first person to get it twice. And this is really, for me, a great honor. And I must admit, I really felt that I had conquered the States at that time. I'd made it really big. Well, you do, don't you? If someone sort of likes you and they like your presentation. But, I really enjoy going to these conferences, because these conferences are about 6,000 to 8,000 people, a massive number of people from about 50 different countries. And you get to really sort of integrate with other people and sort of know sort of what makes them sort of tick. Now, okay, a question of significance. And I don't think anyone would expect my presentation tonight to be complete unless I mention something about significance and the p-value. Now, I'm sort of in this position where I'm passionate about teaching statistical thinking, which is about recognizing sort of sensible study design, sort of collecting sort of meaningful data, and then sort of answering that focused question. But there are a lot of people in the research community who seem to have a lot of blind faith in what statistics can actually achieve, utter blind faith. And even to the extent that some people think I can perform magic with statistics. And I've even been called a wizard at times as well, which is quite flattering. I don't know how to take it. I mean, obviously that's not me. I hope I don't look like that. But the one area which I think people have total, utter blind faith is statistical hypothesis testing and this p-value. Right, which some of you might be familiar with. Now, I'm not going to give you a lecture as to what this actually means tonight, and you'll probably be quite grateful for that. But what is really interesting is how much blind faith people put into this p-value. Now, the p-value is just simply a probability. And as I said at the beginning, probability sort of drives everything that I do. Now, there's this sort of belief that if your p-value, this probabilistic sort of statement, which is indicative of the likelihood that you would have got the data you observed in your study under a particular statistical model. And if you get a p-value that's less than 0.05, people tend to be very happy. And the reason for that is because they tend to think that there's something really important, there's something really significant in their data. So for example, it could mean that it demonstrates that a treatment is effective, or some personal behavior is a very important risk factor for a disease, like eating processed meat is a really significant risk factor for the development of colon cancer. Now, the unfortunate thing with that is it's completely misinterpreted and misunderstood, and it was never meant for that at all. And one of the things that I find I'm doing a lot of now, as I've sort of say my career, as I've moved on, is I used to think this, have this sort of very naive idea as to what hypothesis testing actually meant. But I'm spending a lot of my time now educating the research community, trying to sort of take the idea out and educating people and sort of saying, you know, don't have blind faith in everything we do, because it doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. But it also raises massive ethical dilemmas as well, because so much of healthcare is based on this p-value, this magical p-value, which I would suggest, possibly you might think I'm quite pompous, very few people actually understand. That raises dilemmas for healthcare, because so much of healthcare is based on this, and it has been suggested that much of the research literature is incorrect, and it has led to sort of hype claims and dismissal of possible crucial effects in healthcare. And that is really quite worrying, because that drives, this effectively drives healthcare. It dictates which drugs you get. And I find that quite unbelievable if it's being misused. Well, obviously, the challenge with this, like obviously me taking sort of, I suppose, on a crusade out there trying to educate people, is that this p-value also dictates which papers get published, who gets the research grants, and then obviously it lengthens your CV, and then it dictates who gets promoted. So I'm hoping that it doesn't actually well, in a way it has dictated if I've got my promotion, because in a way I spent a lot of time on trying to educate people about this. And I find that this p-value has got like a life of its own. It dictates so much of what we do in society, but it's grossly misunderstood. Now, so that's one of the things that I'm focusing a lot more in my career at the moment, trying to educate people widely, much wider outside the university lecture theatre. Now, as I've sort of, just sort of extending these ideas, 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, I got invited to be an international statistical editor for two journals, AOGS, Acta Obstetra and Gynecologica Scandinavia, and British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And it's no coincidence they're both obstetrics and gynecology. That was because a colleague of mine, Amar Bide, who's not here tonight, basically said, would you want to be one of our statistical editors? And I sort of thought, okay, I'll do it. Sorry to say this, it might look good on the CV, actually, that you're doing some sort of international work. But what I didn't raise the thought of was getting these research articles to review every like one or two a month, just reviewing them, because the idea of reviewing other people's research really bores me to tears. I'll do it. I'm quite happy to do one or two a month, but I didn't really want to do too many of it. But what I found out when I started interacting with these journals is how much journals have changed. 15 years ago, all they were interested in was publishing research articles, and that's all they ever seemed to want. But nowadays, there's a greater fusion between education and research. What I do a lot with these journals is about educating the researchers and the editors, and that's about trying to improve the research that is published. And I really enjoy that, because you get to work with a lot of people. I mean, I've got a lot of colleagues in Scandinavia, I know them quite well, and I really find it interesting working with clinicians and trying to educate the research community. And this is sort of this area of sort of like moving forward, trying to take sort of what I do, sort of trying to educate the research community, because I don't do a lot of research, but trying to educate it, and that's obviously educating students as well. Really, it's something that really defines me now. I really enjoy doing it. It's sort of given me like a new lease of life. Now, okay, I have to conclude at some point. I can't go on speaking all night. It's 6:30, and probably you want to get to the drinks and everything. Gone on a little bit longer than I wanted, so thank you for bearing with me. But there are, obviously, I haven't been able to mention everyone tonight. And there are people in the room who really have helped sort of, I think, sort of get me through my career. And I've sort of mentioned Ashok, he was great at the beginning of my career, and Margaret as well. Mustn't forget Heather as well. She was a great colleague to have in the early days at St. George's, a really tremendous colleague. And also Fiona, I haven't mentioned Fiona. Fiona, we worked together. You were a great support. Do you remember about 10 years ago, just prior to when you left? We can't go into the details of what was happening to the institution then, but you're a great colleague. And there are just a couple of people I haven't mentioned. And there are people here tonight whom I haven't mentioned as well. I don't know if they're watching online, but colleagues like Julia Clarkson and Heather Humphrey, they worked in admin, so it's not necessarily academic colleagues who get you through, but they were a great support as well in the early days. There are other colleagues as well who, for example, Bridget, and I'm really grateful for Bridget, and colleagues like Nidhi Soffet and Amir Bide, who basically you had the faith in me to actually get involved in your study, in your clinical trial. It's an early phase trial. And that to me was really great. And you've basically allowed me to generate interest in an area of research which I'm really quite interested in now, early phase clinical trials. Now, there are other people, okay, that I need to thank. And I don't think they don't really get much of a thank you in these inaugurals. And that's the students. Okay, they form a massive part of our community. You know, without them, none of us would be here. We would not exist. Okay, so we really have to thank them. Now, I love students because when they come to my teaching, they'll say, you know, James is working, obviously he's been my student. Okay, they'll tell me their feedback and they say, we don't quite get that. So I need to adapt my teaching and my thinking in order to be able to sort of get this statistical thinking across. But at the same time, you know, they become your friends, which is really quite interesting. And there's a subgroup of students who I really have to thank a lot, and that's my personal tutees. And I'm really grateful. Sorry to single you out, Jack. You know, as one of my personal tutees, okay, I learned so much from them. I think being a student is not easy. It creates a lot of anxiety, and you know, I think it's quite poignant that today is the start of Mental Health Week, which has a focus on anxiety. And I don't think being a student is that easy, particularly when you get dragged in, when you start university, I should say, not dragged in, but you start university through that pandemic. And, you know, basically, you know, you were locked in your rooms effectively at the start, and that was not easy. And so being, you know, sort of a personal tutor, I've learned so much from you. You know, it's not all about sort of research or teaching, but it's just about life sometimes. And I'm really very grateful for that. Because, you know, we've had some ups and downs with my personal tutees, but it's a really great experience. So to conclude, all right, I'm going to finish on one note. Right, colleagues said to me that I was a self-made man, but I would say I don't think that's true, because I think everyone in my life, my friends, my family, my colleagues, you're the people that have made me. Without you, I would not have got to this position tonight. So I'm really very, very grateful for that. Thank you. Over to you, Janet. Okay, thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Philip. That was truly wonderful. I've got a few notes here, but anyway, just help keep me on track. But thank you, that was truly wonderful. And for those of us who are statisticians in the room, you know, we say amen to so much of what you've said, and but there's so much that we can learn. Thank you, Professor Hyam, for inviting me, and thank you, Philip, for asking me to give this vote of thanks. It's a real honour, and I'm just so grateful to be here. And thank you, everyone, for being here and supporting Philip and celebrating with him. It's a fantastic opportunity to listen to what you've done and do the journey with you and celebrate with you. As Philip has alluded to, my friendship with Philip goes back a very, very long way. So we both joined George's in the 1980s, round about the same time. I think I might have joined a little bit before. And for 2 years, as Philip said, we shared an office, and that was in Genowing, just down the corridor. I don't know if it's still there or not. Genowing's still there, but whether the room is still there, I don't know. But it was fantastic to share an office with you. And I guess along the way, we learned how to teach. We learned how to put into practice the stuff that we'd learned at university. And you've sort of alluded to that, really, that I guess when you finish a university course, you haven't really done very much statistics at all. Well, you have, but you don't really know how to actually put it into practice. And we sort of learned that under the mentorship of Martin Bland to some extent. And as you said, Philip, we were all thrown into teaching, which was wonderful, terrifying, but wonderful. Doing statistics back in the old days was very different for those who are a little older. We didn't have laptop computers, and any statistical analyses we did was done via a terminal using a mainframe up at central London, accessed using this really nasty job control language. I don't know if anyone in the room remembers. Well, I know at least one person in the room remembers that. So things have come a long way, but I guess the thing that I just really want to say is that the essence is the same. The essence of statistics is the same, and the essence of being able to know what to do, to communicate it with other people is just the same. And Philip, you have been a wonderful example over the years of how to really think about statistics, to think about what it means, to think about how you teach it, how you communicate it, to respect, and I would even say love and honour your students and work alongside them and make sure that they engage, because it's true, students sometimes find statistics hard, sometimes they find it irrelevant, sometimes they find it boring, and sometimes all of those, but you've worked incredibly hard to make sure that you can communicate and engage with them, and I think that is truly, truly wonderful, and a massive credit to you. I just want to say just a tiny bit about why statistics is important, just because as a statistician, I feel I need to say that. Why is it that we celebrate somebody getting a chair in statistics? Well, statistics is so core to medical research. And I guess one of the side effects, one of the sort of silver linings to the cloud of COVID was that for us as statisticians and epidemiologists is that suddenly everybody knew what a statistician, or at least they sort of knew, they'd heard of us. Whereas previously, I don't know whether you say people, I'm a statistician, and the man on the street just sort of glazes over and maybe changes the subject. But now people are really interested because they understand the value of it. But it's always been valuable. It's just that now perhaps we're a little bit more understood than we have been previously. So, the role that you've played in teaching students, in educating them, in making statistics clear, in understanding risk, in collaborating with other colleagues in your teaching has just been so important. And obviously your printed, published works have been so well cited and are so valuable, and they will be going onwards. So, your talk was, to make sure I get it right, was entitled Teaching, Learning and Research, a Journey Through Statistics. And I guess in many ways, we're all learners, we're all learning things. But I think what I see from your talk, Philip, is that there is a very special kind of learning that you have done along the way, where you have learnt, you have adapted, you have made changes, and you have innovated. And that's incredibly important. And I think that's one of the keys to why you've been so successful, that you are a lifelong learner. So I just want to say a little thing as somebody who's a little bit older than you. Please keep thinking and considering and discussing and developing new ways to communicate, because as you do that, we all benefit. So thank you very much, Philip. Thank you. I'm sorry. Go. I was just going to say, and finally, just to say, I think we're all invited to make our way to the collaborative space, which is just around the corner, for drinks, to ask Philip questions and to socialise. I'm sorry, did you want to say anything?
Just thank you.
Brilliant, thank you.